2 of our week-long series, Bush League Justice, how the Bush administration has politicized the Justice Department and overstepped its constitutional boundaries. Tonight, the administration's unprecedented use of what are called signing statements, or how the president has expanded his own power. President Bush doesn't like to veto laws. He doesn't have to. Since he took office, he's been regularly attaching conditions to laws already passed by Congress, allowing him to essentially disobey the will of Congress and dramatically expand his own power. In total, the president added so-called signing statements to more than 1,100 sections of legislation, an unprecedented number. That's almost twice as many as all 42 prior U.S. presidents combined, on a whole range of issues from interrogations to education to energy policy. For example, in 2005, Congress overwhelmingly voted to ban torture. The next day, Senator John McCain joined the president for a photo op at the Oval Office.
A common objective, and that is to make it clear to the world that this government does not torture.
Well, not necessarily. 2 weeks later, the president signed the bill, but quietly issued a signing statement effectively allowing him to ignore the new law. In 2006, a new law instructed the Justice Department to report to Congress on the use of the Patriot Act. The president signed the bill, but added that the president can order Justice Department officials to withhold any information from Congress if he decides to. Translation, Congress's law doesn't mean much. Joining me now, Charlie Savage, the Boston Globe reporter who won the 2007 Pulitzer Prize for his reporting on presidential signing statements. He's done more than anyone else to remove the veil of secrecy on this subject. And from Washington, the law professor Jonathan Turley. All right, Professor Turley, let me start with you. How big a deal is this? I mean, a lot of people are not talking about this. Tell us why it's so important.
Well, it's very important because essentially by using signing statements to this extent, the president becomes a government unto himself. He's usurping a legislative power that was given by the framers to Congress. But it also invites illegality, that by qualifying these laws, he allows agencies and officials to say, we thought we were interpreting the law correctly as the president told us to do so, when nobody honestly believes that that interpretation was correct.
So, Charlie, how does he get away with it? I mean, effectively what he's doing is, I'm not going to bother vetoing laws. Instead, you know what I'll do? I'll accept it. I'll have a nice ceremony. We'll all shake hands. And then at the end, I'll add something that basically says, I like this part. I don't like this part. This is the part we're going to enforce. How is he allowed to do that?
Well, how this works is the way a signing statement works sort of behind the scenes bureaucratically is it's instructions to the executive branch about how they are to enforce the new statutes that are created by a bill. It gets filed into the Federal Register, but no one outside the executive branch typically reads these things. And so when the president says to the military or the Justice Department or whoever, this section of the bill, you will consider that to be unconstitutional because I alone have said that, that means you don't need to enforce it. And what that section actually is a limit on his own powers as president. That means essentially he doesn't need to obey that section of the bill.
And it's Professor Turley, let me read you one of these, all right? This is from 2006. This is the Department of Energy, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, its contractors may not fire or otherwise punish an employee whistleblower who tells Congress about possible wrongdoing. That's the law. They're trying to protect whistleblowers. Here's what the president adds to it. The president or his appointees will determine whether employees of the Department of Energy and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission can give information to Congress. I mean, it's effectively saying whistleblowers don't have any protection.
That's right. And it's an extraordinarily destabilizing effect upon our system. You know, our system has really only one rule that can't be broken, and otherwise it's idiot-proof, and God knows we've tested that. And that one rule is you can't go outside the rules, that each of the branches has to respect the limited authority given to the tripartite system. And what this president is doing is saying, I'm going to yield to Congress except when I disagree with it, and then I'm going to become a government unto myself. And when you attach to that all the other areas of his unprecedented claims of authority, he represents almost an imperial presidency.
Yeah. And Charlie, there's a lot of talk that Dick Cheney is behind a lot of this.
That's right. I've written a book called Takeover, if people are interested in it, in which I trace this desire to expand presidential power back to Dick Cheney's experiences as the chief of staff to Gerald Ford in the 1970s, in that post-Watergate, post-Vietnam moment after Nixon had fell and Congress was sort of waking up and reimposing some constitutional controls on what had gotten out of control, the imperial presidency. That seared Dick Cheney. He would spend the next 30 years of his career working to restore the imperial presidency, though he wouldn't, of course, call it that. And now, as the most influential vice president in history, he's been in a position to bring that vision into
Charlie,
reality.
Is he the one literally, picking which ones they need to target?
His aide, David Addington, who's been with him since the Iran-Contra investigation in the 80s and was with him in the Pentagon as well, is said to be the chief architect of these signing statements and is also sort of the leader of the administration's legal team that has been pushing these very radical theories about a president's supposed power to bypass laws and treaties at his own discretion.
All right, Professor Jack Goldsmith, Harvard Law professor, former Justice Department official here, says about signing statements, nobody reads them, they have no significance, nothing in the world changes by the publication of a signing statement. The statements merely serve as public notice about how the administration is interpreting the law.
No, I know Jack, and I have to disagree with him on this, in that it is much, much more serious than that. What it does is it gives legal cover to officials who violate the law, in some cases violating criminal laws. Torture is a good example of that. Torture, and specifically waterboarding, is a crime. It's been viewed as torture since the Spanish Inquisition. And Congress, somewhat belatedly, took a stand against it, and the president immediately negated it. Now, he negated that law not because he had, previously complied with any standards. He wanted to give his officials some cover. So as they continued to violate criminal law, they could say, well, you know what, there was this ambiguity. There was this disagreement in terms of interpretation. There was no ambiguity. There was no disagreement in terms of what the language meant. There was only a signal from the president that his own people will not have to follow it.
It's not interpretation, Jonathan, to say we will not enforce portions of this law.
It's denial.
Right.
Yeah.
It's astounding to me how they continue to get away with this, and no one, apart from Charlie Savage and a few others, have been really making a big deal. And I know Professor Turley, you have too. All right, thanks to both of you. That's why we asked you both in the program. Charlie Savage and Professor Turley, thank you very much.
Thank you.